All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. But then let's get started with a small video and then we'll begin with our session.
Claps of thunder and flashes of lightning illuminate a swelling sea as a ship buckles beneath the waves. This is no ordinary storm, but a violent and vengeful tempest, and it sets the stage for Shakespeare's most enigmatic play. As the skies clear, we're invited into a world that seems far removed from our own, but is rife with familiar concerns about freedom, power, and control. The Tempest is set on a desert island, exposed to the elements and ruled with magic and might by Prospero, the exiled Duke of Milan. Betrayed by his brother Antonio, Prospero has been marooned on the island for 12 years with his daughter Miranda and his beloved books. In this time, he's learnt the magic of the island and uses it to harness its elementary spirits. He also rules over the island's only earthly inhabitant, the dejected and demonized Caliban. But after years of plotting revenge, Prospero's foe is finally in sight. With the help of the fluttering sprite Ariel, the magician destroys his brother's ship and washes its sailors ashore. Prospero's plotting even extends to his daughter's love life, whom he plans to fool for stranded Prince Ferdinand. And as Prospero and Ariel close in on Antonio, Caliban joins forces with some drunken sailors who hatch a comic plot to take the island. The play strips society down to its basest desires, with each faction in hot pursuit of power, be it over land, other people, or their own destiny. But Shakespeare knows that power is always a moving target, and as he reveals these characters' dark histories, we begin to wonder if this vicious cycle will ever end. Although Prospero was wronged by Antonio, he has long inflicted his own abuses on the island, hoarding its magical properties and natural resources for himself. Caliban especially resents this takeover. The son of Sycorax, a witch who previously ruled the island, he initially helped the exiles find their footing. But he's since become their slave and rants with furious regret. And then I loved thee, and showed thee all the qualities of the isle, the fresh springs, brine pits, barren place, and fertile. Cursed be I that did so. With his thunderous language and seething anger, Caliban constantly reminds Prospero of what came before. This island's mine, by Sycorax my mother, which thou takest from me. Yet Sycorax also abused the island and imprisoned Ariel until Prospero released him. Now Ariel spends the play hoping to repay his debt and earn his freedom, while Caliban is enslaved indefinitely, or at least as long as Prospero is in charge. For these reasons and many more, The Tempest has often been read as an exploration of colonialism and the moral dilemmas that come with encounters of brave new worlds. Questions of agency and justice hang over the play. Is Caliban the rightful master of the land? Will Ariel flutter free? And is Prospero the mighty overseer, or is there some deeper magic at work, beyond any one character's grasp? Throughout the play, Ariel constantly reminds Prospero of the freedom he is owed, but the question lingers of whether the invader will be able to relinquish his grip. The question of ending one's reign is particularly potent, given that The Tempest is believed to be Shakespeare's final play. In many ways, Prospero's actions echo that of the great entertainer himself, who hatched elaborate plots, maneuvered those around him, and cast a spell over characters and audiences alike. But by the end of his grand performance of power and control, Prospero's final lines see him humbled by his audience and the power that they hold over his creations. With the help of your good hands, gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. This evokes Shakespeare's own role as the great entertainer, who surrenders himself, ultimately, to our applause. One way that Shakespeare entertained his audiences was with his clever and cutting insults. Learn how to diss someone with style by watching this video. More of a lover than a fighter? Find out more with this video.
All right, the link is in the chat box. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another day, another session on MEG5. As a matter of fact, this is the last session on MEG5, and today there's a reason why I started with this video, but I shall come to that a little while later. A few days back, while I was dealing with new criticism, Param had asked me as to whether it is fashionable to employ new criticism these days, or do people really venture out to new critical practices? Well, so ever since I just wanted to share an article with you, and not an article, a piece of an article with you. And as regard to that article, it appears in this book called Albertian Review of Journal, published in 2018, which is an entire anthology on Hamlet, studies on Hamlet. And the man at the cover page is Dr. V.C. Harris, whom I often keep talking to you about. So it's Dr. V.C. Harris after his death, as a tribute to him or a homage to him. All his students or disciples, including me, the rest are indeed one of the best teachers or the best of the best in the academia. All of them joined together to bring out a book on Hamlet, studies on Hamlet basically. And there are approximately 25 essays. I'm not sure if this book is still in print, but nonetheless, it is worth a read. And in this book, there is one extract or one chapter which is on Polonius. It's titled Problems 2, and it is on Polonius. And that essay is written by me. And this is not to glorify my potentialities. But then, yeah, the name of the book is actually it's a journal, Albertian Review of Literature, and the name of the book is, or that particular edition is Hamlets for Harris. Right. Just in case you wanted to know or have an idea of the contributors, it includes Japanese poet Taro Aizu, Dr. Ravindra Ranasinha from Sri Lanka, Professor C.S. Jairam, who's one of the stalwarts in literature in Kerala. For the Malayalis, you may remember him as the father of Kalidas Jairam in the movie Pukal, the person who says, who speaks the story of Lord Byron. It is again an interesting story. Lord Byron went to a poetry competition and he couldn't complete within the limited time, so he had to rush and finish it. So he was wondering what should he write. So in a line or two he completes where I forgot the lines exactly, but where God meets water or something like that. Or no, where water meets its master or something like that. Okay, so yeah, Professor C.S. Jairam, Professor T.M. Yeshudasan, who's also associated with Dalit Studies, Dr. K. Jeevan Kumar, Dr. Josie Joseph from SB College, St. Berkman's College, Kottayam, Changanasheri, Dr. Jeevan Kumar, Kolbe Davis, Akhilesh Udaybanu, Adib Hussain, myself, then Meenu Tangachan, Anthony Jose, Bibin Thomas, and so on and so forth. So, and again, Sherry Jacob K, who has edited and compiled this entire volume. He was formerly the HOD of Union Christian College, Alvi. Okay, so that's not our issue here. The fact that I was trying to bring forth is the essay. Let me just share my screen and take a good 5 minutes of digression before we begin. All right, this is the essay, Problems 2 of Punctuations and Transformations. This is a soft copy. It got printed, but then I can't show you the printed version, so that's why I've put the page on display. This is not purely a formalist attempt as such, but this is more of a postmodern narrative that I have employed, of pastiche, of intertextuality, of wordplay, and so many things. You could see that I have used full capitalization, then blended language, then I have repeated paragraphs or paragraph structures, and so on and so forth. So there is a narrative structure to it. Because we have a lot of other things which are important to deal with, I'm not going to read this, but rather I shall share this with you in the group. Or if you email me, I don't mind sharing this article with you in the email. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you read this entire article on Hamlet, this article argues that the protagonist of Hamlet is not Hamlet, but Polonius. Yes, you guessed it right. Polonius, who's Ophelia's father, who doesn't even appear for, let's say, a quarter of the play or a half of the play. He dies midway. He gets stabbed by Prince Hamlet, and he dies in, I don't exactly remember the scene, but then somewhere in the middle of the play. But in this article, I have claimed that Polonius is the principal character in the play, based on the screen space and the proportionate presence and dialogues that are given to him. For that, I have taken the texts. For when I say texts, I have taken the 2 quartos and the 1 folio edition of Hamlet, and I have compared the dialogues of all the characters in all these editions, and I have tried to draw an analogy of the number of words spoken by all these people. And on a proportionate level, Polonius stands out. So it is a formalist analysis because I undertook a textual analysis. I have looked for a word analysis to be more specific at the ground root level. Yes, I can share the entire article with you, either in the group or if you mail me. I don't mind sharing the entire PDF with you. All right. So this was way back in 2017-18. And this table explains a lot of things, the number of occurrences, the dialogues that they have, and quite a lot of such things, and what happens in the folio and all. All right, so this is something I wanted to share with you, Param, because you had asked me the other day, and I took a couple of days because we didn't have time to discuss this before that, or prior to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, well, we can do that as and when we please, but then how much would people appreciate it depends on how you place it. This article was appreciated at various literary quarters because I was trying to do something that nobody has done. If you go and Google, there are quite a lot of studies going on Hamlet even today. There are quite a lot of people who come up with their observations. They talk about Hamlet, they talk about the king Hamlet, they talk about the villain Claudius, they talk about Gertrude in a feminist perspective. And there are even works on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern or Horatio. But then not a single person has extensively studied Polonius before me, prior to me. And I'm not boasting about it, but then that's how you place certain contexts and make your work stand out. Whatever you do, one way of making it stand out is how you place that particular work in the context of what exists before. And that's where some basic preliminary research would help you. One final word before moving on, because I'm not sure whether I'll be meeting you on behalf of Vigino anytime sooner. So why would everybody choose a course or opt for a course? Because eventually everybody wants to pass and get a job. So when it comes to English, there are quite a lot of career opportunities, including content writing, proofreading, writing dialogues, or it also helps to appear for public examinations. And there are quite a lot of opportunities, but due to various reasons, most of the learners prefer to end up being teachers or college lecturers, to be precise. Some again venture out to do B.Ed for 2 years and end up being school teachers. But some people also venture out to become college lecturers. So just a couple of minutes on that. So if you like to become a college lecturer, after completing your MA, you can write it even when you're in the first year though. You have to write an exam called National Eligibility Test, NET. Currently, the December session exam has been called for, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure about the last date for application. So if you are interested, you may apply for the exam and give it a try. It is not about intelligence because it is in the objective manner. You just have to bubble out the answers from the given choices. So it's more of a fluke. It's more of a luck. So if luck shines bright on you, irrespective of the knowledge that you have, you can clear the NET exam. And the minimal marks required for your PG in order to become a college lecturer is 55%. And again, if you belong to SC, ST, OBC, and gender-wise and all, then there are cutoffs that differ. Sometimes it may come as down to 48%. The bare minimal qualification is you must have PG within 2 years of getting this NET. That's why I said you can write it in the first year. If you write it in the first year and suppose you clear it, from the date of issuance of the certificate, within 2 years, you must complete your post-graduation and present your certificate. That's the only challenge. So ideally, if you are in the second year, definitely go for it. The exam happens twice in a year. This particular year, it happened twice because last year there was only one occurrence due to various reasons. It is conducted by NTA, National Testing Agency, and as I told you, the PG marks required is 55, which I'm sure most of you would get. I'm talking about 100, total percentage. Okay, whatever marks you get, let's say 2000 marks पे अगर आपको 1200 मिलता है, divide it into 100, and then if you get 55 above, then you are in. And that is my opinion or observation based on my presence in the academia, Ramsha Farman. People really have a popular misconception about net. Earlier, it used to be, not objective, but, descriptive. People had to write essays and short notes and all. And you really didn't have to bank on luck, but it was your talent. But when it comes to language, the objective methodology is not suited as far as I'm concerned. Because that's why we have quite a lot of netizens who cannot write a single paragraph without spelling and grammar mistakes. So that's why I say it's fluke. You go bubble it out. If you're lucky enough, you will go through. Yes, talent or knowledge may help, but I know quite a lot of people who are one of the best students of mine, but they seldom get through. Despite 8 to 10 years of hard work, they are not able to crack net. B.Ed is for school, Shruti Tilak. You don't need B.Ed to teach in colleges. All you need is an MA and net, and PhD will become mandatory soon. So ideally, to do research would be ideal, whether you get NET or not. Again, net is helpful in getting a spot for PhD as well, especially if you get JRF, Junior Research Fellow. The remuneration is pretty high. You get 31 to 37,000 rupees per month for 2 years or 3 years. Then you can convert it into SRF, Senior Research Fellow, and again it's somewhere close to 50,000 now per month. So without working, आप research करोगे and they will give you money. So that's the advantage of JRF and SRF. And net is not mandatory for PhD, Ramsha. If you write an entrance examination and top the rank list, there are universities and colleges which take you in without net, at least for the time being. Net is not made mandatory for enrolling for PhD. Yes, if you have net or if you have JRF, you will get that, edge, the super ticket. जैसे कहते हैं ना, if you take certain subscriptions, you have this, you can skip the queue. Or if you have a certain amount of credit card, you can skip the queue in the airport. So similarly, if you have JRF, you can simply go and get enrolled. There are no formalities. If you have net, then there are certain complications involved. If you don't have net, you have to write the entrance exam, top it, then quite a lot of janjat, and you don't get any grants. If you don't have net, unless it's a self-financing university of sort or deemed to be university types, you don't quite get any. So again, it depends on the institution. There might be certain universities which would make it mandatory that you should have net for PhD for enrolling, but again, that depends from one place to another. Just double check. But I know a lot of places where they'll allow you without net. The university where I do, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, is one university where you can write the entrance, top it, and do this without net. I actually cracked net 5 times, though it doesn't really stand any sense. You could crack once, that'll be fine. I attempted JRF, failed 4 times is what it means. But nonetheless, when I say I cracked 5 times, there are people who look at me like, oh, this is a great thing, you are such an intelligent fellow. That's not the case. All the 5 was fluke. The first time in particular, I gave the net exam. I still remember in the afternoon, I was thinking of walking away. Back then, it used to be a full day exam with 3 papers, a common paper and 2 subject-related papers. So I thought of walking out at the lunch break, but then somehow I felt like, chalo, itna I had to lick lete. And then I gave it. And somehow in fluke, or due to fluke, I cleared that first NET exam. Currently, they only have 2 papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Paper 1 is general paper, paper 2 is subject paper. So if you prepare some basic, IGNOU materials are the best. When students ask me, I say, if you read the IGNOU blocks and go and write net exam, high chances that you will get. And I can tell you that I from my, let's say, almost a decade-long experience at IGNOU, in a proportionate analysis, quite a lot of my IGNOU students clear net exam when compared to the regular learners. Well, sometimes we have to speak the hard truth, Ramsha Farman. I can't sugarcoat things, and because you will come back as a teacher, there is a responsibility. If I give you fake promises, you will come back and say, "आप ही ने तो बताया था, देखा हमारा हाल क्या है." So I have an obligatory role. Whatever I tell you, there is a responsibility involved. So I have to speak truth. So I was about to say another truth which may scare you or demotivate you, Ramsha. With that, I'll end the digressions and get back to the class. So yeah, regarding the what do you call yeah, if you crack net, what happens? Even if you crack net, you're not going to get into the academia because PhD is being made mandatory. And then currently, if you're in Kerala, the government of Kerala has brought out a circular last month. It is a good just circular, no wonder about that. But people like us would never be able to work in colleges because what netizens do is they work as guest lecturers primarily. Because if you have to become a permanent lecturer, there are quite a lot of things. PhD, the one with PhD gets 6 additional marks. One with MPhil gets 2 additional marks. If you have rank, you get 2 marks. So इस सब के बाद आप सिर्फ नेट से जाते हैं, and if you have experience, you get up to 5 marks. So if you go without all this as a fresher, you're not going to get into the academy as a permanent faculty. Yes, you can work in self-financing institutions, autonomous institutions, deemed to be universities, and so on. But there will be exploitation as well. So the problem with having net is it does not guarantee you a job. So फिर भी people were happy because there's a higher pay scale. You can work as guest lecturers in various colleges. But the Kerala government has brought out a circular last month which states that hereafter in aided colleges, guest lecturers can be empaneled or taken only from the PSC list, the Public Service Commission list. So PSC was conducted way back in 2019, if I remember correctly, 19 or 20. And the list will be there till 25, 26. So if you are currently post-graduating and cracking your net, you can't work as a guest lecturer because you are not in the PSC list, because you haven't written the list, written the exam yet. So the only option that you have is to work in self-financing colleges or in the autonomous institutions or in the institutions where they'll require English as an ad hoc prospect, as in QSAT, FISAT, fisheries and technology, engineering colleges. They may require English soft skill training, so for that they may hire you. But again, the payment may not be that good, 300 per hour, 500 per hour, or 10,000, 12,000 per month, like that. There will be a high amount of exploitation. The same may be seen in, let's say, for instance, if you try to work in any autonomous or self-finance colleges. When compared to the UGC pay for guest lecturers, which is somewhat about 43 to 47,000 in Kerala, the other payment would be sometimes a maximum of 20 to 25 and a minimum of, let's say, 8 to 10,000. So those are the risks. And again, you may not have work during March, April, May, and salary during March, April, May. So these are the risks involved. And so then you may ask, then why crack net? So I say, if you crack net, there is one benefit. You can take net classes, net coaching classes. You can go and take net coaching classes in coaching centers. You can personally guide people. Most of the coaching centers pay pretty well. If you're experienced, then it goes from, say, 400 to 1,500 per hour. So that's a really, really fruitful opportunity awaiting you. But I didn't start this discussion to say all this. My intention was to say something else. My intention was to say, post the COVID pandemic, there are quite a lot of people who have found it a blessing that if you have a mobile phone or a laptop, you can conduct online classes. So you have quite a lot of people who teach English language and literature. Especially if you have already given the exam last term, you can, you immediately have an audience here. When the exam dates are announced, you can have a crash course, maybe conduct classes for these people at a minimal rate. Let's say we have 45 students here. And let's say if there is someone, I'm simply naming somebody. Let's say if there is someone called Shravan, and Shravan has already written the exam last year and cleared it. So Shravan can offer a course, a tuition course, a crash course online. And let's say I'll take 500 rupees per person for a paper. So even if there are 20 people who come to you, Shravan, you can get 10,000 within, say, a week or two. I'm saying a minimal amount. You can charge 1,000. There are people who charge 5,000, 10,000. I know a few academic counselors who conduct crash courses. at 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, etc. I don't do that because technically we are prohibited to do that, and I'm really busy with my research and quite a lot of things. So I don't have time for such ventures. I do this because of my passion. I take classes because of my passion, not for money per se. So I don't do that. So there are quite a lot of people who resort to online teaching. That's what I was trying to say. So you can also try your hands based on your qualifications, whatever you do or whatever skills you acquire. So today, I would very quickly talk about post-colonialism. And let me begin with a disclaimer that whatever topics I have discussed so far are very important when it comes to an examination perspective. Whatever areas I have touched, I can bet that they will come for your exam in one way or the other. And regarding the portions that I left, it doesn't mean it won't come. But then sometimes it may also not come. Sometimes it may come, but then because we didn't have time to cover everything, and as I've already told you in the beginning itself, academic counselors are not expected to complete the portions. We are actually just supposed to discuss with you your doubts and clear that and just call it a day. But then because we know your predicament of not getting a class, we go to the extent of literally spoon feeding you by introducing the concepts to you. And we are not ashamed of that either. So the topic that I'm going to deal with today is post-colonialism, and you may not necessarily get an essay question from that topic. Rather, you may have quite a lot of short notes from post-colonialism, as much as I have gone through your previous year question papers. But then there could be one-off instance here and there where you get an essay question as well. But again, you always have a choice. There are 10 questions from which you have to write 5 questions. So okay, that is a valid question. That's also something that I wanted to do today. Rather than lecturing monotonously, I wanted to take your questions and maybe discuss with you quite a lot of concepts. So I'll do that as well, Varsha Krana. I'll talk to you about that. No, let me not keep it to the last. Post-colonialism, फिर भी बीच में कह लूँगा, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. So regarding your question, Varsha, I had discussed this during my initial classes, if I remember correctly. बात ऐसा है कि understanding these concepts or understanding these topics or understanding the subject depends a lot on your language. There's no two way about it. Irrespective of whatever excuses we come up with, that we are non-native speakers of English, our mother tongue is not English, maybe we didn't study English till 5th standard or 10th standard, or we are not good at English, our English teacher was not good enough, or grammar confuses us, or whatever our or maybe we studied in a non-English medium school, whatever our excuses are, the moment we have opted for MA English, then it is our responsibility to make sure we up our standards and we work towards our language and comprehension in particular. Regarding the blocks or regarding the study materials, there are 2 or 3 observations that I'll make. One, as I already told you, IGNO study materials or MEG study materials are one of the best that you'd ever come across. If you go through all those study materials thoroughly, there's a high probability that you will clear NET in the first or second attempt. I can vouch that. I've seen quite a lot of examples of my students following this advice and coming back to me and saying that they were able to clear. Secondly, the materials are highly standardized and qualitative because the expert panel who have gone behind writing this are really stalwarts in literature, especially from Delhi University, JNU, and so on. So because of that, the material is comparatively a bit complex. You may not be able to follow all the concepts or language, the jargons being used. That's why I try to simplify them. Of course, there are people who look at these YouTube lectures and comment that इसे कौन टीचर बनाया, ये क्या इंग्लिश बात, ये क्या explain कर रहा है. He's not even using the concepts properly, or he's not taking the names properly, which is not true. The thing is, I think from the shoes of the learners who cannot comprehend these jargon. When I use, let's say, a word like difference or let's say catharsis or anagnorisis or peripetia, I, rather than following those terminological pedagogical path, I try to use words and I try to simplify it in a way that you are able to understand this. Because I personally have found that if you understand a concept, it becomes easier for you to follow it up later. If you don't understand the concept, then you will not feel interested to read. So what I focus during my lectures, and I'm glad that at least in this particular batch, quite a lot of you have understood that. Like there are batches where I have to end up apologizing or giving excuses or explaining why I do this. In your case, you have been benevolent enough to acknowledge what I do. So more often than not, why in my lectures I try to treat in the simplification of the concepts is that once you have heard me and kind of understood what this is, then it becomes easier when you go back to the blogs or when you go back to Google or when you go back to any other book. It becomes easier for you to follow. For instance, when I have simplified what science signified is, and why it doesn't appeal to the sense of Derrida and how Derrida have converted it into something else, then the moment you go back and read that, it becomes easier for you. Or yesterday when I said I'm going to attempt a diachronic study of feminism, from Mary Wollstonecraft to, let's say, Elaine Showalter, the moment you get synchronic diachronic linguistics as a short note, the confusion is evaded because you could remember, अरे sir उस दिन feminism को diachronic बोला था, and he took from Mary Wollstonecraft to Elaine Showalter. So it means diachronic is across the times. So synchronic would be through the time. Easy हो जाता है. So that's the thing that I have focused on. So when it comes to the text that you can refer, I have not completed Varsha. So the text that you can refer, in the first class itself I said, if you are not competent enough to read a proper textbook or a guidebook, you may even go back and read illustrated classics if available. There are simplified books available. For instance, for Shakespeare, you have this thing called manga classics that comes from Japanese. MANGA, manga classics. They are in English though. Japanese editions published in English. So you have picturesque illustrated versions of Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, Macbeth, The Tempest, etc. You understand it? Hamlet is drawn and there is a dialogue and there is a dialogue exchange. So you will remember that easily. You'll be able to understand the concept easily. So there are quite a lot of those pictorial books available in the libraries or in the web or in the downloadable spaces. I don't want to take the name. I'm sure you know the spaces. So yeah. So which book or which help book is the best depends on where you stand. Let's say if you speak English like Shashi Tharoor, and if you go and read this illustrated classics, you won't like it. You may need a Routledge companion or an Oxford companion, or let's say Edward Albert's History of English Literature. But if you are a medium learner or an average learner or a below average learner, then you may not be able to comprehend any of these works. Then maybe you have to resort to the sort of videos that I show you. Study.com or what do you call TED or sites like this from which you can watch videos and understand the concepts, animated versions, right? So that would help. So you need not always think of referring a book per se. You may also refer to videos. You may also listen to audios. There are plenty of methodologies that can be incorporated into your learning process, which would take you a long way in terms of helping your health. All right. So that's something that you can think about when it comes to referring books. That will definitely help you for your exams in particular. All right. So let me get started with some basics on postcolonialism. I'm not going to talk about the historical facts, which you would have learned in your school or college days. The distinction between imperialism and colonialism, the emergence of colonialism, the colonization of countries, including India and Africa, and the decolonization process wherein we all gained independence or freedom, and the post-independent, post-colonial state, or NUI as they call, that we experience. I'm not going to take you through any of those historical facts, but I'm going to only discuss a few concepts that may be of your interest. So I'm just naming a few concepts here. So just going to name a few theorists whom I will quickly rush through. Don't confuse this man with the founder of ISRO. This is the theorist. This man has nothing to do with ISRO. These concepts may appear for your exam as short notes, and that's why I am mentioning them in the chat box. I could see someone raised her hands. Go on. Yep. And last but not the least, Chinua Achebe versus Ugi you. All right. So these are the basic things that I'm going to rush through. I'm going to rush through because I would prefer your questions because you may have quite a lot of questions to ask, I'm sure. So I don't want to, leave you high and dry. So I'm going to take you through a few concepts very quickly. So when we speak about post-colonialism, when it comes to literary criticism in particular, the starting point of post-colonial discussions is the book Orientalism, published in 1978 by Edward Said. Even though the spelling is SAID, the pronunciation is Said. So Edward Said came up with Orientalism. The concept is very simple. He says that the concept of the Orient is a construct by the West, by the European West, in order to facilitate their colonializing mission or the colonizing mission. And when it comes to colonization, there are quite a lot of terms that we may have heard of. Again, I'm adding that to the chat box as well. The white man's burden. These are a few more terms that you need to be aware of. So, what is the white man's burden? It is again you have a poem by that name. Who wrote that poem? The White Man's Burden. Anyone? The White Man's Burden is a poem by you know him. During your childhood, you would have seen a cartoon by that person. Rudyard Kipling, yeah. The one who wrote the Jungle Book, whose poem If is quite popular during the school days. So Rudyard Kipling has also written this poem called The White Man's Burden, which kind of delines the dilemma of the Western European colonizer. The argument by the West is that those in the colony are uncouth, uncivilized barbarians who had to be civilized. And this divine will has fallen upon us to take in the civilizing mission. Oh, that's something. I put it as colonizing. I'm sorry. Civilizing mission. Civilizing means making a group of people cultured. And which culture is better? Our culture, the Western culture. Which God is better? Our God, the Western God. And why is it better? Because we have a monolithic structure. We have a single God, and you are segregated by several gods. So our language is the best language. Our culture is the best. Our God is the best. Being white is a superior thing, and you are uncouth, civilized barbarians. Your language is barbaric. Your dressing style, your manners, your culture, everything is barbaric. Literally, we want to loot you because you have all the resources, but then we'll call all these as excuses and we'll loot you and we'll divide you and we'll rule you, was basically what colonialism was all about. So Edward Said says that this was all for the benefit of the West and Orientalism was a construct. Then, before moving on to the further critics, let me also bring to you certain post-colonial debates, which is very central to your understanding of the concept. While talking about post-colonialism, two writers that suddenly comes to our mind from Africa is one a Kenyan, the other a Nigerian. One is Chinua Achebe. I'm sure you would have learned his stories or novels during your college days, like The Water or The Divine Intervention, or novels like The Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, Arrow of God, Ant Hills of Savannah, and so on. So Chinua Achebe at one end, at the other end you have James Ngugi, otherwise Ngugi wa Thiong'o. There is an N, but then the N is silent. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. These two can be considered as two pairing opposites. Chinua Achebe, we are talking about post-colonization, independence. So, post-colonial context. Chinua Achebe wrote novels about colonization and the problems faced by the local people in Africa in English. Please listen to me carefully. Okay. So, just a second. My network is okay, that's fine. Yeah, just in case my network gets lost, please be patient. I'll be right back. All right, it's okay. So, yeah, Chinua Achebe, despite being born an African, wrote his stories in English, and his stories were filled with the oppression of or the conflicts created by colonization in Africa. On the contrary, James Ngugi, otherwise Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he started writing in English. His first novel, No Longer at Ease, is a classic example. So not No Longer at Ease, I'm sorry, Weep Not Child. No Longer at Ease is by Chinua Achebe. So Weep Not Child by Ngugi wa Thiong'o was in English. Then he also wrote another novel called The River Between. Both these novels were along the Achebean lines, the horrors of colonization and the problems of the indigenous people in Africa or tribal people in Africa and the after effects. But after writing these two novels, Ngugi had an afterthought which Achebe never had. The afterthought is Ngugi was thinking, whom am I writing for? Or for whose transformation or faida benefit am I writing for? And he realized that he is trying or he is using literature as a tool to empower, enlighten, and change his people, not the Britishers or the Frenchmen who have already left. In a post-colonial context, they have left after looting them. So he's not writing to impress the West or to make them realize the horrors that they made here. His primary motive is to write for his indigenous people. So Ngugi switched gears and he started writing in his local language, which is Gikuyu, Gikuyu, Gikuyu. It is a classic case of post-colonial resistance. He was completely against anglicizing everything. You would very well know what happened as part of independence all over the world, including India. We still have the hangover. The Britishers went. What was the independence all about? It was a political cartographical freedom. Right? Lord Mountbatten and Nehru signed, and Jinnah signed that from tomorrow there is no British India. This part will be called India, this part will be called Pakistan, and whatever you have to deal with, you can deal with. There were states like Hyderabad who sought to be independent countries, which was crushed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's army. And for the Malayalis out there, just in case you don't know, there were 3 independent states back then in 1947, whose kings, whose rulers wanted to be 3 independent countries rather than combined to form a state. That is Tirukochi, Malabar, and Tirudangur. They wanted to be independent countries and not join India. But again, due to political pressure and the army pressure, by 1950-51, they agreed to form what is today called as Kerala. So amidst all the struggles, so what happened was, one is political freedom to rule. Second is cartographical. Cartographical means related to the map. When you look at the map, you say this place to this place is India, this is Sri Lanka, this is Pakistan, later this is Bangladesh, and this is America. So that's cartographical. So you have a cartographical borderline politics happening, and you call that to be India or America or whatever you want. So why am I saying all this? Where were I? Completely lost it.
Post-colonialism.
I know I'm talking about post-colonialism, but why did I speak about this independent thing? Oh yeah, so after gaining independence, most of the colonies, they gained a political cartographical independence, but then whatever was introduced by their colonizers remained. You look at our educational system, our medium of communication, the courts, the structure of courts, everything is like what was set up by the Britishers. The same exists in most of the colonies in Africa and America and India. So this didn't go well with Gyugi. So Gyugi revolted against this, and Gyugi started writing in Gikuyu. So it in itself was a rebellious act. And Gyugi, ever since, started writing in Gikuyu. And later, for the sake of publishers and all, he translated them into English. When it comes to the English academia or the so-called canonical recognizable places, like say for instance, the Booker Prize, James Gyugi would never be bestowed with a Booker Prize. He'll always be there in the list, will be there in the final round, but he'll never get the Booker Prize. Last time he wrote a novel called The Sacred Crow. It was listed for Booker, but he didn't get the Booker because he has revolted against this hegemony of colonizing. He has cautioned people like us, the third world countries, to be wary of the perils of colonization. So, James Gyugi, there are a couple of works I would like to talk to you about, which would be helpful to you. Oh yes. So there is this essay by James N. Gyugi called "On the Need of Abolishing the English Departments." Yes, Anjuji, go on. I can see your hands raised, Anju Kumari. Is it by mistake? On the Abolition of English Departments by James Gyugi. I'm going to share that entire PDF with you. It's a very small essay, 3 to 4 page long. If you feel interested, you may go back and have a look at that. In that essay, it's actually a letter written to the governor of Nigeria, urging him to make Gikuyu or the local tribal language the common medium of instruction. He claims that English, if remains a medium of instruction, it will intervene in all the other domains like history, politics, science, everything. He says then that will become Anglican history, Anglican biology, Anglican physics. They will hijack our culture. It's something that Gyugi wants way back in 1945-50, I remember. Another work I would like to cite from Gyugi is that he was detained. He was in jail for a long time, and he wrote in toilet papers, the tissue papers that we talk about. And that book's title is pretty important. That book is titled, it was published in the 1980s, early 1980s. That book is titled Decolonizing the Mind. Imagine, let's say 20, 30, 40 years after independence. Yes, the colonizer has left, but we are still following their customs, their tradition, this institution set up by them, their language as a medium of instruction. Even the way we dress mimics our colonial masters. And ever since the 20th, 21st century onwards, we have this digital colonization happening, to which I shall come back later. It won't be asked for your exam, but just in case you want to have an extended knowledge about this, you may better have an idea of digital colonization. Okay. So Gyugi wrote this book called Decolonizing the Mind. So what did Achebe do? Achebe wrote in English, was revered by the Englishmen. He received quite a lot of awards. But then he stood up for the black cause once when Joseph Conrad wrote the book that's published for you, that's prescribed for you in MEG 3. What is the book that's there for you in MEG 3?
Heart of Darkness.
Yes, The Heart of Darkness. The Heart of Darkness. The heart literally signifies the center of darkness. Okay, so The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So Achebe gave a speech in 1964. That speech is titled An Image of Africa. An Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. An Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. In that speech, which was also published later, he lashes out at Joseph Conrad and accuses him to be a racist. He says that Conrad presents a non-real, an untrue image of Africa, which is equivalent to the savage conception of the colonizer in The White Man's Burden. He presents Africa as exotic, unknown, mysterious lands full of gold and other prospects, and he shows it as a dark continent. So such a portrayal is condemned by Chinua Achebe in An Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So I would recommend you to go through these works if you can. It would help you have a better understanding of the post-colonial scenario. So apart from that, a few more works that I would like to recommend to you, even though we are not going to discuss this in detail, is The Empire Writes Back. It's a landmark work. Yes. Yeah. By Ashcroft and Griffith. The Empire Writes Back. Then you have Nation and Narration by Homi J. Bhabha. I have already mentioned his name a little while earlier. I'll come to him in a while from now. So Nation and Narration by Homi Bhabha. Then we have Culture and Imperialism, another seminal work by Edward Said. Culture and Imperialism by Edward Said, the one who wrote Orientalism. Then you have Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak and her work In Other Worlds. I'm not going to discuss any of these works, but then you may go back and have a look at it if you're interested, that is. Okay. So, from Jameson Dewey and Achebe, we'll speak about their novels sometimes later when we get time. Remember the 1964 speech An Image of Africa, because when you attempt Joseph Conrad's novel in MEG 3, if at all you do, then this would be significant to you. Yep. So after Orientalism, The White Man's Burden, Colonizing Mission, then what you need to remember, again, Frantz Fanon and Albert Memmi. Frantz Fanon and Albert Memmi are two post-colonial critics that you must be, or that you should be aware of. Frantz Fanon is credited with two major works. He has written quite a lot of them, but two major books. One is The Wretched of the Earth in 1961, Black Skins, White Masks in 1952. I repeat, Black Skin, White Mask in 1952, and The Wretched of the Earth. Albert Memmi has written a work called The Colonizer and the Colonized, which is considered to be a major work. Colonizer and the Colonized. So what happens with these two people is that it's a stark. I would just simplify it for you. I won't detail much. So what happens with Albert Memmi and Frantz Fanon is that they were part of a conceptualization of what may be called as violent nationalism. Sometimes you may have short notes on nation and nationalism or borders, as I said, cartographical borders. So these people have written extensively on that in the works that I have mentioned, and they are talking about one, nationalism is a construct, or the concept of nation is a construct. These boundaries are all imaginary lines drawn for political power ruling sake. So they speak about, or they advocate, or they vouch for a sort of violent nationalism. I hope that phrase doesn't need an extended explanation. They are talking about gaining freedom and retaining power through bloodshed, war, through violence by the colonized. Especially the concepts put forward by sorry, the concepts put forward by the by Franz Fanon is in stark contrast to the Gandhian ideology. We have a man in India who walked upon this earth with a loin cloth and a dundee, and without hitting anybody, without urging for war, without causing bloodshed, he won us independence through the principles of ahimsa and satya, truth and ahimsa, non-violence. So, from Gandhi's land, when we read Fanon and Memi, it's a different thing altogether. It's stark opposite, it's stark contrast. These people vouch for a violent nationalism. And another similarity is in most of their works, the preface, you know what a preface is, the initial part, something is written. The preface is written by Jean-Paul Sartre. We had briefly mentioned this guy yesterday, the existential philosopher come writer, friend of Albert Camus, and the husband of Simone de Beauvoir. So Jean-Paul Sartre came up with the preface because he was also an advocate of violent nationalism or vigorous independence movements. So yeah, so that's something that you need to be aware of.
What is the book name, please?
No. Jean-Paul Sartre is the name of a writer. He has written preface for these books by Franz Fanon and Albert Camus.
Okay.
And the preface is more violent than the authors themselves. Sartre advocates for violence at a magnitude which is larger than the writers themselves.
Okay.
So that's why it calls for a reading. Yeah. So before proceeding further to certain terminologies, let me also tell you why I started with the Tempest today. At a latter, okay, I'll come to that a little while. Okay, one more short note to fill. Sorry, I missed it. So the three phases of post-colonial writing. Sometimes you have it for short note, and people confuse the titles, just like the three stages of feminism according to Elaine Showalt, adopt, adapt, and no, the other one, gynocriticism thing that I said yesterday. So similarly, when it comes to post-colonial reading, you have three phases: adopt, adapt, and adapt when it comes to post-colonial writing. So what does this mean simply? Adopt is a phase of colonial literature which criticized white representations of colonial countries. When it comes to adapt, European form adapts to African subject matter, that is, self-exploration of colonized society happens, celebration and examination of diversity, hybridity, and difference within the colonized takes place. And a classic example for adapt phase is The Empire Writes Back by Ashcroft and Griffith that I have already mentioned. The Empire Writes Back, celebration of our indigenous qualities or capabilities, self-exploration of the colonized society, acknowledging and accepting hybridity, difference, ambivalence, whatever we possess. During the last stage, the adapt stage, there is a declaration of cultural independence. African writers, for instance, remake the form to their own specification. They refuse to use the term post-colonial for that sake. They try to forge an independence of their own based on their culture or cultural tradition, legacy, supremacy, whatever you call that. So at this particular phase, we could see that classics were being reread and reinterpreted from a post-colonial perspective. So you come across a post-colonial reading of The Tempest, and then Caliban and his characterization becomes problematic. Okay, so Caliban and his characterization becomes problematic in that context. It becomes problematic in a rather large sense because Caliban is shown as, if you see in that video, as a dark, short guy is emblematic of the colonized subjects. And his behavior, he's made a slave, kind of a slave, and he's made to do all the manning work by Prospero. And there is this popular scene in that play where, half drunk, Caliban abuses his master. There's a master slave relationship, and Caliban abuses his master. Does anybody remember the dialogue? If you have studied this before, it is a central point in post-colonial literary studies. Anybody?
And Calvin has said that I am abusing you because you had taught me the language in your
Yes,
language.
exactly. So Caliban says, "You taught me language, and I use it to curse thee. Let red plague bite you. कीड़े पड़े तुझे." Exactly in Hindi. कीड़े पड़े तुझे, बाढ़ में जाए तू मुझे भाषा सिखाया था, मैं तुझे अब्यूज करने के लिए, कस करने के लिए तेरा भाषा इस्तेमाल कर रहा हूँ. So that's why I started with the Tempest today, to give you that post-colonial essence of what exactly was going on over there. Okay, so moving on from that, what else did I miss? Yes, a few concepts. So talking about a few concepts that comes in again from Homi Jahangir Baba. Once again, I caution you not to confuse him with the founder of ISRO. He is not that person. He is the post-colonial theorist, Homi J. Baba. So Homi J. Baba came up with this concepts of hybridity and mimicry. So what is hybridity? What is mimicry? Those who are pet lovers would know what hybrid means. Mix of two different breeds. So what could be hybridity in a post-colonial context? Hybridity in a post-colonial context becomes significant for those who probably married or were in relation with the foreigners, the colonizers, when they were here. So what happens to these people once the colonizers leave us? So they are in a hybridized environment. A classic example that's often given is those of Anglo-Indians. If you remember the movie Mangal Pandey, the character played by Amisha Patel. So the Anglo-Indians allegedly never want to be among us, one among us, the Indians, because they have married the attractive, white, civilized colonizer. They want to be regarded as their legacy. But because they haven't taken them back, because they won't have them as their own, because we are the other. Othering is another concept I want to talk, I forgot. Okay. The other, they won't have them with them. So they are in a dilemma where they are betwixt and between. They are neither here nor there, or they don't want to be here, but then they won't be taken or accepted there. So this is the hybridity scenario, the hybridity conundrum, or the hybridity scenario that Baba speaks about. Along with that, he brings in this concept of mimicry. Not the mimicry of enacting somebody's voice. That's a mimicry that you may be familiar with. But in the post-colonial context, the term mimicry signifies more of copying the manners of the colonial master. Maybe because the Britishers dress in an attire of a coat and suit, we try to, mimic them. So that becomes an example of mimicry. I'll give you an example from a local story. One person who has written immensely well about this scenario is O.V. Vijayan. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with O.V. Vijayan. O.V. Vijayan was a political cartoonist who was a staunch critic of Srimati Indira Gandhi's politics, especially the emergency. O.V. Vijayan was a Keralite. He kickstarted what may be called later in English as the postmodernism in literature. Back then in Malayalam, this didn't exist. What existed was Adhunika Kalagattam, what is modern age, and modern literature. The transition from modern literature to postmodern had not happened in Kerala back then. So that was later regarded or called as neo-modern in Kerala because of Vijayan. Much before postmodernism, between modernism and postmodernism. In Malayalam literature, we have something called neo-modernist literature, thanks to O.V. Vijayan. Malayalis may be familiar with his masterpiece, Kasakinde Idihasam, a legend, or in English that's translated as the Legends of Kasak. In English, don't read it because it really doesn't serve the purpose. It is about the language of Kasak, a village in Palakkad. And the indigenous language becomes complex for even Malayali readers. Most of them wouldn't even complete reading that book. But from a post-colonial point of view, we are not reading or we are not intending to read Vijayan's Kasakinde Idihasam. But our interest in Vijayan should lie in his novel Dharma Puranam or his collection of short stories. Dharma Puranam is a typical dystopian novel. If you know utopia, then you have a dystopian genre of fiction as well. So Dharma Purana is a dystopian fiction. Dharma Purana begins with the lines Prajapatiki Turan Mutti, Titan Dinnan Mandrimar Katununu. I don't know how to translate it into English. It's something like the king wanted to shit and the ministers waited to eat shit. More often than not, from a political point of view, it is high sarcasm. If you read it from an internal emergency perspective, for that sake. O.V. Vijayan's Dharma Puranam is a classic example, a must read. But let me take you through a few of his short stories. He has written a short story called Chavittu Vandi. In English, the pedaling wagon. The pedaling wagon. So the pedaling wagon, the story is such that there is an orphan in a village. His parents die and the guy is orphaned at a very young age. So at that time in that village, there was a doctor family who were basically Britishers, a doctor and his wife who didn't have children. So they were basically Britishers and they adopted this child. And when independence took place, they went back to Britain, but they continued paying for this guy's education at a city. So after completing his education, this guy comes back to the village and he wants, just like I spoke about the Anglo-Indian conundrum, this guy doesn't want to be the villager. He wants to be like his parents. He wants to be regarded like a Britisher. So he tries to mimic the manners of the British. So back then, the cycle used to be a heavy object. To ride a cycle was difficult than riding a horse. You had to push it, then run behind it, jump, and then get on top of it. Then you had to control it physically. So unless you are that masculinely capable, you cannot handle a pedaling wagon or a cycle. So our central character attempts to do this and keeps failing again and again and again. And the villagers keep ridiculing him. They also had a nickname. I couldn't recollect that right now. I forgot. But then they started ridiculing him because he cannot master the pedaling wagon. So that is a typical case of mimicry. Hybridity, I'll give you two quick examples. Again, in O.V. Vijayan's short story, Oru Yuddathinte Avasanam, the end of a war. What happens in the story is there is a Velichapadu. I don't know what you call a Velichapadu. The deity, the pujari in the local temple who does this thing during the festivals and says, I am the goddess here. I am here to give you an oracle from the goddess. Yeah, that guy. That's called Velichapadu in Malayalam. So a Velichapadu is the central protagonist of the story. And like Kandar. So that Velichapadu is in a village, in a temple, and he makes a living by curing people's illness. People go to the temple for whatever illness ranging from the fever of the baby to, let's say, cancer. So they go to the pujari and ask him to pray for them. And the prasad would be a basma, the powder. So he'll give that powder and he'll say that if the goddess has to be pleased, then you have to give goddess liquor and chicken. So which goddess this chicken and liquor is going to. But nonetheless, the pujari demands that chicken and liquor be given to the goddess so that the basma be strong. And because of some fluke, his medicines worked most of the times. If it doesn't work and somebody dies, the pujari would put the blame on the goddess. Not on the goddess, but then you would have done some sin that the goddess was not happy with you. What can I do about it? So at that particular point of time, a doctor couple came to the, I don't remember if it's a couple or a doctor, but then a westerner came to the village. He was a doctor. The pujari prohibited the villagers to go to the doctor. He said, Devi will be angry. If you go, the goddess will be angry. Don't go to him. He's devil, he's evil. Don't go to him. So for a few days, he was able to restrict the villagers from going to the doctor. But one fine day, a lady came with her baby in her arms, full shivering out of fever, and the basma didn't help. So being the maternal embodiment that the lady is, she rushed with the baby to the doctor. He gave a tablet, probably paracetamol, and the pain and the fever immediately vanished. From that day onwards, the entire village started flocking in front of the doctor's house and abandoned the Velichapad. So eventually, he grew crazy because his source of income, his liquor, his chicken, everything was lost. So we have this climactic scene where in the tree in front of the temple, Almaram, yeah, in the tree in front of the temple, he nails a cross of Christianity. He nails a cross. He puts in a velak. He lights the lamp, and he prays to the deity to give him a source of earning, income. I hope you understand. A Hindu pujari draws a cross and a lamp, and he prays in front of it for this. Another example that I can give you, especially for the Malayalis, is there is this popular movie in Malayalam starring Prithviraj and Mamta Mohandas called Celluloid. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the character who played the role of P.K. Rosie. So P.K. Rosie is one of the first actresses in Kerala, a Dalit actress who couldn't complete the movie because he was a Dalit. So in Celluloid, the character played by P.K. Rosie gets converted from Hinduism to Christianity. She gets converted to Christianity. That's why her name is P.K. Rosie. Then this filmmaker, he invites her to be a part of her first film, Vigada Kumaran. And there is this puja ceremony happening, the first day puja ceremony. So because the filmmaker is a Hindu, he and his wife brings in a lamp and they light it and they pray with folded hands and they give it to Rosie. So Rosie, who is now a Christian, who used to be a Hindu before, is confused how to handle the lamp. So she initially folds her hand and then immediately remembers that she's a Christian now, and she draws a cross. So this is a classic example of the concept called hybridity. Right? So on that note, I somewhat sum up. These are the concepts that you may have for post-colonialism. I'll just play one more video and then come back and take your questions. The discussion can be extended a little bit more if you want, because this is the last class. So 7:30 is not the end if you want to, that is. But don't go away, because being a last class, we can also have a group photograph at the end. I haven't seen most of your faces. I may not recognize you if I meet you somewhere. You may, on contrary, recognize me. So yeah, let me just play one video because I haven't touched Karl Marx or Marxism to you. So very quickly, let me play a small video and come back and we'll have your questions and wind up.
Most people agree that we need to improve our economic system somehow. Yet we're also often keen to dismiss the ideas of capitalism's most famous and ambitious critic, Karl Marx. This isn't very surprising. In practice, his political and economic ideas have been used to design disastrously planned economies and nasty dictatorships. Nevertheless, we shouldn't reject Marx too quickly. We ought to see him as a guide whose diagnosis of capitalism's ills helps us to navigate towards a more promising future. Capitalism is going to have to be reformed, and Marx's analyses are going to be part of any answer. Marx was born in 1818 in Trier in Germany. Soon he became involved with the Communist Party, a tiny group of intellectuals advocating for the overthrow of the class system and the abolition of private property. He worked as a journalist and had to flee Germany, eventually settling in London. Marx wrote an enormous number of books and articles, sometimes with his friend Friedrich Engels. Mostly, Marx wrote about capitalism, the type of economy that dominates the Western world. It was, in his day, still getting going, and Marx was one of its most intelligent and perceptive critics. These were some of the problems he identified with it. Modern work is alienated. One of Marx's greatest insights is that work can be one of the sources of our greatest joys. But in order to be fulfilled at work, Marx wrote that workers need to see themselves in the objects they have created. Think of the person who built this chair. It's straightforward, strong, honest, and elegant. It's an example of how, at its best, labour offers us a chance to externalise what's good inside us. But this is increasingly rare in the modern world. Part of the problem is that modern work is incredibly specialised. Specialised jobs make the modern economy highly efficient, but they also mean that it's seldom possible for any one worker to derive a sense of the genuine contribution they might be making to the real needs of humanity. Marx argued that modern work leads to alienation, Entfremdung. In other words, a feeling of disconnection between what you do all day and who you feel you really are and what you think you'd ideally be able to contribute to existence. Modern work is insecure. Capitalism makes the human being utterly expendable, just one factor among others in the forces of production, and one that can ruthlessly be let go the minute that costs rise or savings can be made through technology. And yet, as Marx knew deep inside each of us, we don't want to be arbitrarily let go. We're terrified of being abandoned. Communism isn't just an economic theory. Understood emotionally, it expresses a deep-seated longing that we always have a place in the world's heart, that we will not be cast out. Workers get paid little, while capitalists get rich. This is perhaps the most obvious qualm that Marx had with capitalism. In particular, he believed that capitalists shrink the wages of the labourers as much as possible in order to skim off a wide profit margin. He called this primitive accumulation, ursprüngliche Akkumulation. Whereas capitalists see profit as a reward for ingenuity and technological talent, Marx was far more damning. Profit is simply theft, and what you're stealing is the talent and hard work of your workforce. However much one dresses up the fundamentals, Marx insists that at its crudest, capitalism means paying a worker one price for doing something and then selling it to somebody else at a much higher price. Profit is the fancy term for exploitation. Capitalism is very unstable. Marx proposed that capitalist systems are characterized by a series of crises. Every crisis is dressed up by capitalists as being somehow freakish and rare and soon to be the last one. Far from it, argued Marx. Crises are endemic to capitalism, and they're caused by something rather odd. The fact that we're able to produce too much, far more than anyone needs to consume. Capitalist crises are crises of abundance, rather than, as in the past, crises of shortage. Our factories and systems are so efficient, we could give everyone on this planet a car, a house, access to a decent school and a hospital. And that's what so enraged Marx, but also made him so hopeful too. Few of us actually need to work because the modern economy is so productive. But rather than seeing this need not to work as the freedom it is, we complain about it masochistically and describe it by a pejorative word, unemployment. We should call it freedom. There's so much unemployment for a good and deeply admirable reason, because we're so good at making things efficiently. We're not all needed at the coalface. But in that case, we should, thought Marx, make leisure admirable. We should redistribute the wealth of the massive corporations that make so much surplus money and give it to everyone. This is, in its own way, as beautiful a dream as Jesus' promise of heaven, but a good deal more realistic sounding. Capitalism is bad for capitalists. Marx didn't think that capitalists were evil. For example, he was acutely aware of the sorrows and secret agonies that lay behind bourgeois marriage. Marx argued that marriage was actually an extension of business, and that the bourgeois family was fraught with tension, oppression, and resentment, with people staying together not for love, but for financial reasons. Marx believed that the capitalist system forces everyone to put economic interests at the heart of their lives, so that they can no longer know deep, honest relationships. He called this psychological tendency commodity fetishism, Warenfetischismus, because it makes us value things that have no objective value. He wanted people to be freed from financial constraint so that they could at last start to make sensible, healthy choices in their relationships. The 20th century feminist answer to the oppression of women has been to argue that women should simply be able to go out to work. But Marx's answer was more subtle. This feminist insistence merely perpetuates human slavery. The point isn't that women should imitate the sufferings of their male colleagues. It's that men and women should have the permanent option to enjoy leisure. Why don't we all think a bit more like Marx? An important aspect of Marx's work is that he proposes that there's an insidious, subtle way in which the economic system colours the sort of ideas that we end up having. The economy generates what Marx termed an ideology. A capitalist society is one where most people, rich and poor, believe all sorts of things that are really just valued judgments that relate back to the economic system. For example, that a person who doesn't work is worthless, that leisure beyond a few weeks a year is sinful, that more belongings will make us happier, and that worthwhile things and people will invariably make money. In short, one of the biggest evils of capitalism is not that there are corrupt people at the top. This is true in any human hierarchy. But that capitalist ideas teach all of us to be anxious, competitive, conformist, and politically complacent. Marx didn't only outline what was wrong with capitalism. We also get glimpses of what Marx wanted the ideal utopian future to be like. In his Communist Manifesto, he describes a world without private property or inherited wealth, with a steeply graduated income tax, centralized control of the banking, communication, and transport industries, and free public education. Marx also expected that communist society would allow people to develop lots of different sides of their natures. In communist society, it's possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. After Marx moved to London, he was supported by his friend and intellectual partner Friedrich Engels, a wealthy man whose father owned a cotton plant in Manchester. Engels covered Marx's debts and made sure his works were published. Capitalism paid for communism. The two men even wrote each other adoring poetry. Marx was not a well-regarded or popular intellectual in his day. Respectable, conventional people of Marx's day would have laughed at the idea that his ideas could remake the world. Yet just a few decades later they did. His writings became the keystone for some of the most important ideological movements of the 20th century. But Marx was like a brilliant doctor in the early days of medicine. He could recognize the nature of the disease, although he had no idea how to go about curing it. At this point in history, we should all be Marxists, in the sense of agreeing with his diagnosis of our troubles. But we need to go out and find the cures that really will work. As Marx himself declared, and we deeply agree, philosophers until now have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it.
So that is a glimpse of Marxism. And mind you, Marxism is not all about Karl Marx. There have been successors in Lenin, Stalin, Engels, Mao Zedong, and so on. So your blogs may cover an extended discussion as well. I've shared the link with you. I would also like to share a few more links. Another link on Marx. Yeah. And regarding post-colonialism, I have a few more links, and then I'll leave the floor open for questions. Yeah. There is this person called Masood Raja, Professor Masood Raja. He's an expert in post-colonialism. If you want to delve deep into post-colonialism, I would request you to go through the links. Yes, his nationality may be a problem to many because we are in India. But then that apart, he is one of the best people around when it comes to post-colonial literary studies. And I often listen to him when I'd like to recap the post-colonial things. All right, so that somewhat sums up this thing. I'd also like to give you a few examples, not few links, which do not exactly belong to the syllabus, but then which would help you have a deeper understanding of post-colonialism. Due to the want of time, I couldn't get deep into digital colonialism or the modern hegemony which exists through online culture and so on and so forth. So you may look at these links and get enlightened about or have different perceptions about the state that we are all in today. Okay. So on that note, yes, before concluding and opening the floor for questions, let me apologize for the fact that despite my honest wishes, I was not able to cover as much as I wanted to. Generally, I do cover at least a couple of topics more. I couldn't talk about Paul de Man. I could not talk about Stanley Fish. I could not really speak about Marxism. I couldn't get into Freud. I couldn't really speak about Jacques Lacan, another psychologist that not many are aware of, or Claude Levi-Strauss. So there are quite a lot of people I had to miss out due to the other content that I dealt with. Also, the delayed beginnings from the RC, that is starting at 5:45, 5:35, 5:50, have all affected those things, because when you look at it from the outset, yes, we started 15 minutes late on a day or two or three, but when you put it together, it's 1 hour altogether. So yeah, that's a big problem. I'm not being critical, but I'm just pointing out. And well, somebody please take the initiative to do that, because currently I'm not using WhatsApp web, so it may be a little bit difficult, but that's okay. And also I have a lecture tomorrow, so I am not sure I can spend any time after my lecture here today. I have some background work to do before I go there tomorrow. All right. So yeah, I was trying to wind up. So there are a few topics that I haven't touched, and I have given you a glimpse to why it is so and what you need to go and read. Regarding the topics I have done or dealt with, I have given you further reading suggestions as well. I've given you enough links for you to deal with your exams. And I would like to repeat again and again, I have to underline and let you know that exams सब कुछ नहीं होता. When you go, if you want to become a teacher, if you want to go to your class and interact with your students, just a mere summary won't help you. You should be able to critically understand and analyze the text that you have to deal with. If you're going to the class to feed a summary, you're not helping the student, you're not helping yourself, you're not helping the subject domain develop. It will really become retarded, and you end up being a horrible teacher for the learner, because you're not giving him any takeaways, him or her any takeaways. So I would urge you to do that. And yesterday also, I because of the want of time, there are quite a lot of things we miss out. I want to speak about whether a man can be a feminist. Especially there is this work by Henrik Ibsen called The Doll's House. It is a feminist play. Dora walking out of the house, leaving her husband and children behind because of the oppression. So can Ibsen be called a feminist? That's something I wanted to discuss. I couldn't talk about that. I also wanted to discuss a few contemporary theorists. I can just mention that because otherwise, I mean, it will be useful for you. One is Lisbeth Goodman. Lisbeth Goodman's contemporary feminist theaters. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake in theaters, but then, yeah, contemporary feminist theaters. It is first of the attempts at analyzing feminist theaters, taking verbatims from the feminist theatrical artists and try to have an idea of what feminist theater is. Again, what if a man comes up with a feminist drama? Can that be deemed feminist? Another work that comes to my mind is Karen Hollinger's, what was that? I forgot the name of her work. You can Google her, you will get the name. I think on Hollywood styles of acting. On Hollywood styles of acting, where she speaks about how women actresses were made to woo the male prejudices of white, blonde, brunette images. Another theorist that comes to my mind is Laura Mulvey. Laura Mulvey's concept of voyeurism. What is voyeurism? Holding in autumn. But like you peep through the hole to look at a woman naked. So how the male gaze, to put it in a simple word, male gaze is something that puts forward. So yeah, these are something that I missed out yesterday. Also, I wanted to talk about the concept of womanism coined by Alice Walker. Womanism can be simply translated into lesbian feminism. Alice Walker propounded the view that a man can never understand a woman in her deepest sense. Only a woman can understand a woman properly. And the best way is female camaraderie, which is extended to a physical level of lesbianism. Her masterpiece work, which won her the Nobel Prize, The Color Purple, contains such a um, homosexual relationship between the central character Celie with a pop singer Shug Avery. The stories from Color Purple would be shocking enough for you if you haven't read it. In Color Purple, the protagonist, Celie, as well as her sister Nettie, are born to a man whose name is not disclosed. And he, despite being deemed their father, impregnates her thrice. He rapes her and impregnates her thrice, and he sells their children on the market. And when a person who is a widower comes asking for Celie's hands in marriage, her father easily sells Celie to that man for a huge amount. And that man who came didn't come by being attracted to Celie, but rather because he wants someone, being a widower who has kids, he wanted Celie to take care of his kids, wash clothes, cook for them, and also for his sexual needs. And that man. So this novel progresses as it is epistolary in nature. The novel progresses in the form of letters. So when this man, so Celie speaks to or writes letters to God, and in one letter she writes like this: He comes to me as if he does toilet. He comes to me as if to do toilet. That is just a, we have to pee and we urge and we pee and go. She says he just comes to meet his physical desires without paying heed to my physical needs. Later, this man, who's unnamed, whose name is Mr. Dash, almost to a later half of the novel. So this man brings his friends around, and one of that is a pop singer, Shug Avery. So Shug Avery comes home because her hands are bleeding or something, and Celie nurses her. And Celie doesn't like her because probably she believes there's a relationship between her husband and the singer. But later, Shug and Celie start having a good sisterhood. Shug admires Celie's beauty, whereas Celie thinks that she's plump, black, and unappealing sexually. She starts making love to Celie. A homosexual bonding begins, and what happens is the crux of the novel. It was later adapted into a film by none other than Steven Spielberg. Quite a lot of people were excited. They went day one to watch the sexual encounters between Celie and Shug Avery. But Steven Spielberg, being that good Samaritan, that good religious believer of Holy Bible, there was not a single scene suggesting the homosexual relationship between Celie and Shug Avery. Well, yeah, just mentioning. All right, so on that note, I leave the floor open. Well, it's 7:28, but still we can spend 5-10 minutes if you want discussing anything that you want to ask, anything you want to suggest, anything you want to compliment. The floor is open. Our last few minutes, and don't go away because we may end up with a group photograph. So make sure you are there in the group photograph. You may take time to make up if you want. Get ready. Maybe 5-10 minutes later, we'll have a group photograph. A screenshot, that is. All right. So the floor is open if you have any queries. As we part, as we say goodbye, they say they never say goodbye, but then this is probably a goodbye forever. Maybe you can sneak in like Shivangi does or Monica Gupta does in the next batch and listen to this again and again. Yes, Mandavi Vajpayee, please go on. Group pick at the end of the questions, Salman. Well, that's not a problem. If you can't open, that's totally okay. Or you may join from your mobile. You can join again. I suppose that's possible with the ID without them letting you in. That's okay. Yes, Mandavi Vajpayee, tell me.
Thank you so much, sir. My question is regarding, like, as you said, these videos of yours are available on YouTube. So would you mind sharing any link of it?
I have already done in my classes. I have already done in my classes. Which one are you referring to?
No, the videos, like the classes which we are taking right now. I think these classes are getting recorded.
That's available in the RC Cochin YouTube channel. It's already there. I think Salman would share it for you. He had actually shared my January session today
Okay.
of MEG
Actually,
5.
I started joining your classes since yesterday only. Yesterday it was
Okay.
my first class, and
Acha.
today it was second. So,
No worries, no worries. The previous lectures are already there in the YouTube. So thankfully you can have a look at it. Salman or Shivangi or anybody would help you through the links.
all
If
right.
you are in the
And
group, that is.
one question of mine was there, like I texted in the chat box. So if you can check it,
Mhm.
like you were sharing about one essay
Yeah.
in which John Stephenson, I think I don't remember the like last name of the writer. You're talking about that he mentioned everything, the good points of co-education, but one at the last of the essay he shared something like uh, the cons of co-education. So just tell me because I tried to search, I could not find anything. If you
No,
can
I
share the
don't
name of the
remember saying
essay.
in. No, no, I only spoke to you about Mary Wollstonecraft, who spoke about co-education in the 12th chapter of her book, the Vindication of the Rights of Women. I don't quite remember the person that you're talking about.
Okay, you were talking about some essay on co-education. I really
Yeah,
don't
that
remember the
is
name of
Mary
it.
Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women.
Okay, all right.
Or
So
are
that is
you
an
referring to
essay.
the guide? Or are you referring to the guidebook writers? You need not get into them. That's not part of the syllabus. John
Oh,
Gregory and
okay,
James Fordyce.
okay, all
The
right,
good
fine.
daughter, good woman, good mother. Yeah, that's not something that you really need to go back and read. You simply read Vindication, that'll do.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, if any? All right, if there is nothing, then we'll maybe in another 30 to 40 seconds get ready with your cams. We'll have a group photograph. In the meanwhile, if anybody has something to say, you're free to say. It needn't be a question, it could be a feedback, it could be some demand, it could be some suggestion, it could be some frustration, it could be anything. Yes,
So,
Mandaviji?
so sir, I just want to know, like, I recently enrolled myself in the course,
Uh-huh.
and like, I am teaching as a communication trainer. Recently, I
Great.
started my work, and now I
Okay.
want to pursue my career in this subject. I
Mm-hmm.
want to go ahead with PG or something, and then PhD maybe, if
That's
time
great.
and situation
Ji.
allows me. So,
Ji.
what should be there in my mind right now? How should I start?
Nothing much, just read through the blogs or take the texts, and maybe even that again depends on your time, your availability, your language, your convenience. Some people would like to read the entire texts, some people would be happy reading the summaries, some people would like to watch videos, some people would like to read the summary or whatever is available. So that's up to you, whatever is convenient to you. Find the sources or even read the blogs, that will do. uh, Try to understand the subject better, and that will help you in the long run. Regarding the important questions, I have already told you. Go back to the previous year question papers. It is available for free in the web. Type MEG and the paper name and previous year question papers. You can access up to, let's say, your 10, 15 years of question papers. So that will give you an idea of how to approach your exams, what to study, what not to study. Especially in some papers, you can even understand the pattern. There would be a question between Hamlet and Hamlet only. So you have to study Hamlet. In the other section, there would be a question between, let's say, always there would be a question between Waiting for Godot and, let's say, some other play. So if you study Waiting for Godot, that will be enough. You need not study the play. You can skip the other play. So those are things that you can do. Regarding MEG1, as I told you, there is no shortcut. I don't teach MEG1 first of all. So I don't have a shortcut to give you. The only thing is keep listening to these audios. That may sometimes help you eventually. Yes, Param.
This MEG 18, I couldn't find any previous year question papers on the IGNO site. I don't know why.
What is the name of the paper?
MEG 18, American poetry.
That has been recently added. That's why. That's added
Oh,
last year or
okay.
so. And that's why that is not there in the public domain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So Shruti Tilak, that's my suggestion for you. Keep listening to the poems YouTube has quite a lot of audios of these poems. So make a list of those poems, look at the previous year question paper, figure out what it is from Google, and keep listening to them. Maybe look at the summary, understand what it is, and that will help you. And for optional papers, they may not be all the 10 sessions. For papers which are optional, which are not core paper, they may not give you the entire 10 session. They will be 2, 3, 4 sessions, and that's where they would wrap it up. In my case, I end up demanding and bargaining, and I end up telling them that I need 10 sessions. And suppose there are sufficient students, let's say 30, 40 students, then they permit me to take 10 classes. Sometimes ऐसा भी होता है कि there are 10, 10, 12, 15 students and they are also irregular and they are like, देखो, you don't have students, so we need not pay you and we will not conduct these classes on the first place. So they don't have 2 to 3 classes and nothing more than that. So that happens with the RC, all the RC across India. So yeah, for optional papers, don't expect 10 sessions. If you get, that's lucky. So thank you so much for all that. And I'd like to remind you, don't treat literary criticism and theory as a theory. Unless and until you can have takeaways to your daily life and practice it, there is no point in learning this paper. So I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for this wonderful memories and being good, supportive learners. Hope to meet you all sometime at some point of life and wish you all the very best for your life, studies, and career and future. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.